Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cave Across Apologetics. I am Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And if you're joining us, we're in the midst of the early parts of our book by John Frame, Apologetics, A Justification of Christian Belief. And we've covered the preface and the intro. We talked about why this book needs to be the case that it's written. We keep adding to the church. And so there's always a need to write new apologetic material. There's always a need to clarify what's being misconstrued out there from both the unbeliever and the believer side of things. And so we're in the midst of chapter 2, the message of the apologist. And so Frame's going to lay out here a direction on kind of for the apologist. What should we be covering
Yeah.
as far as it goes for kind of the overview picture? What are and he has four subjects that he says every apologist should be looking at, and you can, even if you're covering the events of the resurrection, it's still embedded within these 3 to 4 topics, and so um, uh, we're gonna kind of work our way through and see why they're important and the contrast between kind of what's being offered outside of Christianity that are the big explainers to answer life's big questions. Why are we here? Is there anybody else out there? Is there anything beyond life and death? And so Frame here wants to point to kind of these areas of focus, especially for apologists and also for evangelists. And so that was a good ending to this chapter that I think we'll appreciate here. So we're getting in the midst of it, where he says the apologist's message ultimately is nothing less than the whole of Scripture. So unfortunately, you have to read Genesis to Revelation because it's very
That's
important.
right. Yeah. You have a question about Christianity? Okay, well, let me read the whole Bible.
Right. Yeah. So if we're reading a message from our significant other, and in there it has descriptions of what to pick up from the store and making sure that we get the kids on time. If we happen to just yada 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 over something, maybe we have the bread and the milk, but we don't have the kid in the back seat, and so we need to make sure that that it's all there. So we need to use all of Scripture as our message, and it needs to be heard by those who we're apologizing to, that we're providing an answer for the hope that we have. But in an apologetics text such as this one, his book, it is important to provide a brief summary of the content of Scripture to give direction to the apologetic witness. Then he says that for the purposes of the present book, it will be useful to summarize the message of Scripture from 2 perspectives. First, Christianity as a philosophy, and second, Christianity as good news.
Yeah, right. And so so we have these 2 perspectives here, right? Christianity as philosophy and as good news. He's going to spend the bulk of this chapter then talking about Christianity as philosophy. Obviously, he's a philosopher, he's a theologian, but he's also a philosopher. And so and the philosophy is going to create the worldview that now we're going to use, right, as comparison with other worldviews. And so he wants to spend some time on philosophy so that we have this worldview in mind as we go through the apologetic enterprise. So he says, by Christianity as philosophy, he says, I mean that Christianity provides a comprehensive view of the world. It gives us an account not only of God, but also of the world that God made, the relation of the world to God, and the place of human beings in the world in relation to nature and God. So again, this whole world perspective of it. And then you have the main, I would think the main 3 areas of basic philosophy. So if you take an introduction to philosophy class, you'll probably cover these basic 3 areas. So it discusses metaphysics, that's the theory of the fundamental nature of reality. Epistemology, that's the theory of knowledge, right? What's the nature of knowledge? And of course, values, that has to do with ethics and aesthetics and that sort of thing. And so, given these 3 areas, he says, Christianity as philosophy, it has a viewpoint on everything, And so that's what he wants us to see here.
So kind of metaphysics is the what things are, and then epistemology is how we know things, and values are what should we do, or what is the value of the things that we do. So one of the more unfortunate repercussions of America's distorted view of the kind of separation of church and state, which I appreciate his commentary here, is that public school children are able to hear advocacy of every system of thought except those that are arbitrarily labeled as religious. And so we kind of talked about this a little bit in a couple of our past episodes, where you can bring anything you want into it as long as it's not Christianity, because then it makes you religious. But if you're passing laws, then you have to have a tabula rasa of ethics in order to pass laws, because laws aren't inherently ethical statements. Don't murder, don't steal. Those things kind of sound familiar. Don't lie under false pretense and testimony in court. I mean,
what does that have to do with ethics?
Right. Yeah. How dare you trivialize my freedoms for what you want to do here. So who is to say that the truth might not be found in, or even limited to, one of these religious positions? What if the case that Islam is true, would that affect all of reality? I mean, it would. It would definitely. Or Hinduism, or the Native American type beliefs, or the kind of the from Hocus Pocus for Kurt Vonnegut, that religious belief system that he writes about there. By saying these answers can't come into the milieu of acceptable ideas to bring to the table, you're possibly decounting the number 4 from your answers of, well, what is 2 + 2? Well, I mean, we can consider other things. We can consider cow, and we consider milk and street light, but we definitely can't consider 4, because I mean, you people that believe in numbers out there, I mean, and show me a number. I can show you a cow, but I can't show you a number.
So his point here is this is kind of arbitrary. Leaving religion out is kind of arbitrary when we're trying to capture knowledge and what the state of things and what reality is all about. And we leaving religion out is we're missing something. That's really the point. Saying.
Yeah. Now, it's not until recently that we've done this too.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, people say, well, there's separation of church and state. Well, you can't find that, obviously, in the Constitution. The Constitution talks about the state creating a religion. It has nothing to do with, covering or talking about.
Right. From a federal perspective, too, you still had the allowance of state, literal state-run churches. But it's interesting that separation of church and state is about excessive taxation on the churches won't happen, and so if I could declare myself a church, that would be nice too, to have a separation of church and state there as well.
That's right. Separate me, my taxes from the state.
Right.
Because I'm religious. So
that's the dream. So he says, further, the extreme separationists often seem to be more opposed to the public expression of Christianity in particular than to religion in general. Don't bring it into the classroom or the courthouse or the state convention, or don't let me hear about it. Don't you definitely can't be on the sidewalk and tell people what they're doing inside of a building with children is wrong. It should just be you at home. Even though you say Jesus Christ is Lord, and you go, Lord of what? And you say everything. Okay, then that means the courthouse, the state conventions, the sidewalk, what's happening behind buildings to children, all those things are effective. And so we're discounting these answers that are available to us, and they could be the right ones. And so bring them to the table.
Right. And so what he does here is he says, we have this separation of church and state, so we can't talk about religion in the schools. And in particular, we can't talk about Christianity, right? He says Christianity is excluded from the schools, even though, or perhaps because it's the only genuine alternative to the conventional wisdom of the modern establishment. And so that's the big point that we're going to see in this particular chapter.
Yeah.
He's going to go over this again and again and again, that out of the various worldviews, perspectives that are out there, Christianity is different, and it's an alternative to what the rest of them have to offer. He says in our time, as opposed to say 600 years ago, people are ignorant of the basic Christian worldview. And so he says it's going to be helpful if they understand, the worldview, so that the gospel will make sense to them. So he wants to present Christianity first as philosophy. And again, he's going to, use the bulk of this chapter to do that. And then at the very end, he's going to look at Christianity as gospel.
Right. And he'll kind of get towards the conclusion of this. It's not philosophy first and then gospel. Philosophy is the gospel, and gospel is the philosophy. So,
right.
So it's not of first importance. Be a philosopher, and then you can present the gospel.
Right.
He'll clarify that point, but what he's going to lay out here is the philosophy first, and then he'll conclude with the gospel. All right, so metaphysics. Metaphysics kind of takes the preeminence because it deals with that high view of what is everything. And so the four most important things to remember about the Christian worldview are this. First, the absolute personality of God. Second, the distinction between creator and creature. And third, the sovereignty of God. And fourth, the Trinity. So from each of these points, he's going to lay out how these things affect our understanding of nature from a Christian perspective, and it allows us to provide answers to certain areas of life that these aspects of God's revelation affect.
Right. So metaphysics, the nature of reality here. So God obviously is ultimate reality for the Christian. So that's where he starts here. God, then with regard to his absolute personality, God is absolute. And what he means here is in the sense that he is the creator of all things and thus the ground of all other reality. As such, he has no need of any other being, right? He quotes Acts 17:25 here. For he is independent of everything else, right? So he has no need for any other being for his own existence. He's self-existence. And then he looks at the Westminster Shorter Catechism. He says, in the words of the Shorter Catechism here, God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. And he tells us this definition emphasizes not only God's absoluteness, but also his personality, spirit, right? Spirit. In scripture, and the idea here is spirit means that God is personal, right? God is a spirit, he is personal. As a spirit, then God speaks, right? Acts 10, he gives us leads. God leads us as a spirit. He bears witness with our spirit. He helps us, right? As a spirit. He prays, right? So the spirit prays on our behalf, according to Romans 8. The spirit loves. So as spirit, God does all of these things. So an important part of the nature of God is that God is spirit in his absolute personality.
Yeah. And so he's laying out the fact that from his perspective of the Christian worldview, we have to start with God because God is the creator, and from who God is, it informs us of who we are and also of his creation. He's not creating apart from himself, even though he is not in creation. But there are still aspects of God that we kind of need to hold on to if we are to fully or better understand the nature of reality. And in reading this, I really liked what he does here. So that's what we're going to find out here. So the great question confronting modern humanity is this. So here's the great question. Granted that the universe contains both persons, such as you and me, and impersonal structures such as matter, motion, chance, time, space, and physical laws, which is fundamental. You know,
Mm.
which is of the primary or kind of first things.
Right. The
What is
most
it?
basic. Right.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So is the impersonal aspect of the universe grounded in the personal, or is it the other way around? The personal is grounded in the impersonal aspect. So kind of does matter arise from our personal nature where we called it into existence, or does kind of matter flow and bounce into things and poof, all of a sudden Einstein is created, and he can then look back and see all those particles bouncing around, and you have special and general relativity that comes about. So this big old circular thing that happens. Well, secular thought assumes the latter, that the impersonal gives ground to the personal, that persons are the products of matter, motion, chance, and so on. It holds that to explain a phenomenon in terms of personal intentions, like the house is here because someone built it to live in, is less than an ultimate explanation, less than fully explanatory. On this view, then, an ultimate explanation, a fully satisfying explanation, requires
It's on the impersonal.
yeah, the ultimacy of the impersonal. The person built the house because the atoms in his brain moved about in a certain way. Very creative, yeah, very awe-inspiring. The Sistine Chapel. We look at that and we go, "Wow, that's a lot of paint flecks." No, we talk about creativity. We talk about, man, digging in the soil, and out pops this bubbling crude, and out of it, he saves whales and allows people to read after 6 p.m., thus turning people into a better educated people because of the desire to tame nature, not just, well, the chemicals bounced around in his head to such an extent that he was forced by no other means than to carry out the will of digging up oil. So is that the necessary assumption that we see here? And of course,
Yeah, right.
he's going to argue in the negative for that.
Right, right. So again, personal versus impersonal. Modern secular thought says the fundamental nature of things, the basis of all things, is impersonal, right? And he's taking issue with that. He says, so let's return to scripture. What does scripture say? Well, he says the biblical writers do not hesitate to ascribe the events of the natural world directly to God. God waters the land, Psalm 65. He sends the lightning and the wind, Psalms 135. He spreads the snow, frost, and hail, and then sends his word to melt them, Psalms 147. So the biblical view of the nature of the natural world is intensely personalistic, he tells us. Natural events, non-personal, comes from a personal God. So personal is the fundamental nature of things.
All right. So he wants to then say, let us think through the consequences of both views, because from our basic beliefs, there are going to be repercussions that build down into kind of our actions. So if the impersonal is primary, then there's no consciousness, no wisdom, and no will in the ultimate origin of things. Right? The Big Bang just happened because nothing exploded, even though it was really dense, and it made everything. So it just all things were created from chaos. So what we call reason and value are just unintended accidental consequences of chance events. So why should we trust reason is the question. Is it only an accidental result of irrational happenings? Well, why would we want to trust our very existence to those things that we think just kind of is the result of an accident? And then okay, well, you believe that you're not able to step in front of a bus, but the other person is, and so it's just, well, uh, nature has carried it out so that the person that doesn't step out in front of buses, they continue to pass their DNA to their progeny, and hopefully more people will not step out in front of buses. And so then
no step out in front of bus G.
Yeah, that's that's in the in Jurassic Park somewhere. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's my big qualms with that type of social Darwinism is to explain actions by this evolutionary process is you really have to ascribe so many things to so many genes because of all the permutations that happen here. Okay, we can talk about being scared of quick movements, and we can talk about how we enjoy horror movies because of that. But we can't talk about like, well, okay, if there's high grass and there's movement in the grass, then we get slightly more scared than if there's just a gentle rustle because we can outrun the snake, but the mountain lion we can't. So there's got to be two different genes for both the mountain lion running away and the snake running away. It seems like your DNA sequences have to be a lot more if you're going to ascribe all these certain things to your ancestral DNA. All right. So moral value, I'm sorry, moral virtue will, in the end, be unrewarded because of this personal being ascribed to the kind of these accidental consequences and chance. You're going to be unrewarded. Friendship, love, and beauty are all of no important ultimate consequences, for they are reducible to blind, uncaring processes. Something's nice because your brain functions just happen to fluctuate when you see a pretty picture, but there's no benefit that you can ascribe to a person for their genuineness. You can say, "Oh wow, you gave me a feeling," but that's all it is. It's just an end result, which you can supplement with drugs. So why don't we just be a society that takes way more drugs rather than paint more pictures? And then
Yeah.
how do you describe what a first year student who's drawing a portrait does to someone like Rembrandt, drawing during the Baroque period? You could have no distinction between those two uh, qualities other than the way that your brain has interacted with it. And so you can talk about your endorphins fluctuating at 0.9 rather than 0.6 depending on who you're looking at. So those things like being a good friend or loving your wife or loving your children. And then how do you distinguish between those types of love or that type of friendship? It's hard to do other than by measuring out your brain chemicals, and then your brain chemicals might be different than another person's brain chemicals. So are you a better friend than your friend because the brain chemicals are of different value? Is that how we describe like best friends? Like, oh, I'm able to percolate at for 5 seconds with this person, but only for 3. So this person's more my friend than the other person. It's a difficult process there. Yeah.
Right. So he's making this contrast between personal and impersonal here, and he's looking at the consequences of both positions as ultimate, and of course the consequences of the impersonal, as as we've been spelling out here, as he suggests here, is that there's no consciousness and wisdom and that sort of thing. But so what about the other side, right? What about if the personal is primary? Well, he says, then the world was made according to a rational plan. It's not an accident. It can be understood, this plan, by rational minds. So not only is the world made by a rational plan, rational minds can understand it. Because of that, friendships and love are not only profound human experiences, but fundamental ingredients, he tells us, of the whole world order. This relational nature of things, because it's personal, if indeed that's the case. There is someone who wants there to be friendships, who wants there to be love. All the wonderful things that we find in personality, intelligence, compassion, creativity, love, justice are not some ethereal data, doomed to be snuffed out in the cosmic calamity at the end of everything. But rather, these aspects are what are permanent and most ultimate, he tells us. They are what the universe really is all about. Moral goodness is part of the great design of the universe. It's not just some accident that we stumble into, right? If personality is absolute, there is one who cares about what we do, who approves of it or disapproves of what we do, who judges our conduct. Indeed, personal is ultimate. So he's making this contrast in between the impersonal and the personal.
Right. And so one would think that a fair-minded people, bereft of evidence, forced to speculate, faced with the question of which was more ultimate, the personal or the impersonal, would be equally divided.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting point, right? He says,
Mhm.
so let's just say, let's clear our mind and say, so what might be the case? Is the world more fundamentally personal or impersonal before we even consider anything or look at anything? What would you think? Well, he'd say basically it might, if you asked 100 people, 50 might say one, 50 might say another, right? That's what we would expect, right? Before we examine kind of a, equally divided kind of opportunity.
Right, right. But he says, but no, they almost always gravitate towards the view that if there is any absolute at all, that absolute must be impersonal. And if there is no absolute, that is the same as chance or fate being absolute, an equally impersonalist view.
Yeah. So when you ask the question, he says, from people he's observing always gravitate toward the impersonal, right? He says, for instance, when scientists seek the causes of things, they almost always assume that the personal elements in the universe can be explained by the impersonal, right? Matter, laws, motion, rather than the other way around. They just assume that they gravitate toward the impersonal as an explanation, is what he's suggesting. And when scientists seek for absolutes, for example, the origin of the universe, they seek for an elementary particle, impersonal, or a universal law, theory of everything, impersonal, and an initial motion, the Big Bang, some type of impersonal origin, right? Or a combination of these various things. So the question he asked then is, why is this so? Why do they gravitate or lean more toward the impersonal? Is it not initially, at least, equally plausible that the impersonal matter, motion, force can be explained by the decisions of a personal, right? So why is it? Seems like it's equally plausible. It could be explained one way or the other, but they seem to lean toward the impersonal. Why?
Right. So he goes on to say then that we all have observed how persons create and harness impersonal objects and forces to do their bidding. In a factory, human workers produce a tractor, designed and planned by people. A farmer uses the tractor to plow his field. But we have never seen a plowed field produce a farmer or a tractor produce a workforce. I think communism tries to uh, undo that a little bit, but so far that just ends in death and starvation. So probably not the best idea. So the very idea of this, the tractor producing the farmer, or the plowed field.
In other words, the
ludicrous.
impersonal producing the personal, right?
Right.
That's what he's
Right.
getting at.
And so you've probably used this, example before in apologetics is if you come to a painting in the middle of the woods and there's no one around, did it culminate? Did the berries come together and create this picture of this forest within the forest, and the person would be forced to what be 50-50? Well, it's possible that the wind swept it around and gobbled up this to look in this perfection, or do they see elements of their own possibility to be creative and say, well, no, clearly this is not the case. There's just a creator for this that's not here right now, and so this is kind of the idea that's talked about. But why not one? Why not the other? And from our worldview, we should have an explanation for these answers, and maybe even within that worldview, why the other side has the answer that they do. So Christianity will offer actually both those as well. Yet, to many well-educated scientists, the primacy of the impersonal goes without saying, as it were. That's their presupposition. There's got to be some God particle, a small g God particle out there that is responsible for for the quarks or the protons or whatever.
That's right.
And then you go,
And
well,
notice again, that's the non-personal,
right,
right?
right. And so you go, well, what makes that up? And it's like, well, listen, we have the God particle. Give us some time, and we'll figure out what makes the God particle. And is it particles all the way down? Well, what's at the
Right.
very center of all existence? And so, so far they haven't found that question, but maybe it's the personality aspect to it that is uh, goes without uh, goes without mention, not goes without saying, but like within the halls of academia, we can't do this. And I go back to Sabrina, German name that I am probably going to mispronounce, so I'll just mention her book, Lost in the Math, where she's extolling her fellow mathematicians and scientists about why are we looking for a beautiful argument or a beautiful equation to come about as an explanation for our things that are related to the basic elements of like quantum physics. You know, aren't we scientists? Why are we looking for beauty and simplicity? We should be
Mm,
looking for
mm,
the answer. And so I appreciate that, and you can find a review of the book and why she actually is attempting to be a consistent atheist while also using biblical imagery in her book, which was pretty interesting to catch every once in a while. But so even with scientists, they want to view the impersonal, but when they're looking through their bag of tools, they want to talk about things that have order and make sense. But why should that be the case? Why why are we looking for the things that um, uh, tend to best fit in this random chance universe where we're not sure that even the answers that we do have are leading to truth rather than just survival?
mm, mm. And so again, the question is, why do scientists, why does modern man lean more toward the impersonal than the personal when we're seeking explanations?
Hmm.
Why is that the case, right? And he says the only even remotely possible explanation of this situation is the one given actually in the scriptures, in the Bible, that through God's existence, though his existence is clearly revealed to all, and Romans 1 talks about this,
Hmm.
rebellious mankind seeks to suppress that revelation and thus to operate on the assumption that God, the God of Scripture, does not exist. So he suggests the Scriptures give us an explanation for why we have this bent toward the impersonal as an ultimate explanation. It's because we're in rebellion, right? He says this is not the most, is this not the most likely reason for the almost universal but irrational preference for impersonalism over personalism? Is this rebellion?
All right. So in this section, he says that he has not, of course, proved the biblical personalism is true. He says he just merely set it forth over and against its antithesis to show the reader one fundamental aspect of the of apologetic task. So he says, we are called to stand firmly against the almost universal presuppositions that the universe is fundamentally impersonal. We must not allow the unbeliever to suppose what he usually supposes, that of course the impersonal is the ultimate. We must challenge him to consider the alternative and also to provide an answer for why he believes that as kind of the default. And if he
Mhm.
says that he is of that he is certain of his impersonalism, and if he despises anyone who thinks otherwise, is superstitious or stupid, we must challenge him and we must ask him to give for his view the kind of proof that he demands of us. So again, people are bringing certain values and outlooks and importances to the table, and so it's not just okay. You present yours. I've denounced it. Therefore, I'm right. And we should, as Christians, should also see that as well as um, we also have the burden of proof when it comes to these big explanations. It's not just well, you're wrong. Therefore, I'm right. It's you seem to be incorrect here, or you're living contradictory to what you're claiming here. And so, is there a better uh, um, model for the explanation of these three things: the metaphysics, the epistemology, and the ethics? And once we show him that the impersonal is the product of irrational faith, we will be in a good position to present the one alternative to that impersonalism, the alternative presented in Scripture. And so that's what the apologetic method does: is always be ready to give an account for the hope that you have, with gentleness and respect. And where do we find that answer? Is it not the role of Scripture to um, be the hope that we have, and the account for the changed life that Paul attributes to being an answer that we have the ability to walk and understand and know the things, and not suppress the truth in our unrighteousness, and find a consistent nature which we can uh, um walk in our metaphysics, and recognize the personal aspect of the universe that's missing from the account of the age.
And so, so he's going through this metaphysical positions, right, of Christianity, the philosophy. And the first point here that he's making is that according to Christian philosophy, God is ultimate, and therefore he is, and as ultimate, absolute personality is ultimate. So God is personal, and that's the foundation, the ultimate reality with regard to metaphysics, right? And there's a bent or a lean in secularism toward the impersonal. And he suggests that, at best, it should be 50-50, but it seems irrational to lean toward the impersonal when, we have all of this arguments and evidence that indeed ultimate is personal.
All right, and then the second and kind of last one that we'll cover for this episode is this very important, very Van Tillian relationship that he wants to cover, is the creator-creature relationship. This is, according to Scripture, God is both transcendent and immanent. His transcendence is simply the fact that he is radically different from us. He is the creator, and we are his creatures. God's immanence is his involvement in all areas of creation. So he's not so high above that we couldn't have the possibility. So it's like us or ants trying to communicate with to us. He's transcendent, but he's not totally removed from his creation. God is the planner of and the main actor in human history. Ultimately, it is with him that we have to do. From Genesis to Revelation, the ultimate question facing humanity was this: how are we to respond to God and his word? That's the question that keeps coming up through throughout all the Bible. And sometimes we do a decent job, other times we don't do a good job, but it's written down so then that we can learn from it and realize exactly what God wants from us, and how we should act.
Right. Yeah. So his point here with regard to the creator-creature relationship is that God has a relationship with us and desires a relationship with us. God is transcendent, right? He's radically different than we are. He's the creator and we're the creatures. But he's also, as you mentioned here, immanent. He's involved in all areas of his creation, right? So the biblical creator-creature relationship, like the biblical doctrine of God's absolute personality, is something, he says, that is beautiful. No longer do we have the intolerable burden of trying to play God ourselves, trying to be ourselves the ultimate standard of truth and right, with all the attendant anxieties that come from that. But rather, we can rest in the bosom of our Creator and learn from it. Wondrous things of how the world was made and his purpose for us. So we can integrate our small and brief experience here on earth with his revelation, right? Seeking to apply that revelation to ourselves. So that's this idea of the creature-creator, the creator-creature relationship. We can have a relationship with our Creator, who is both transcendent and immanent.
And so I put up on the screen in post. So editor Patrick, please do so in remembrance. Van Til has this connecting two dots or two circles picture that he's used to explain kind of the distinction between both the creator and the creatures, which is us. And then there's a line through, and that line is the revelation from the top down, the revelation of God to us. So that's both how we have our understanding of our existence in the universe and our relationship to it, and also our ability to know things as well, which we'll cover actually next time when we finish up the metaphysical side of things, and then we'll get into the epistemology and the ethics, and also the gospel aspect to why these things are important, and why Frame is starting with the philosophy that informs our apologetic for figuring out why we should be justified in having a Christian belief. So we'll start that next time. And as always, you can go to caveofthecross.com or on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and check out all the short clips that we post throughout the week, and then all the various different audio platforms that you can find as well, including book reviews. And anytime we appear on other shows or people share our stuff, we put that on caveofthecross.com. So you can check out all that for even more content and even more books that you need to buy and put on your shelf and actually read them. So that's the goal. And so you can check that out there. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.